Nobody in my immediate family is a veteran. My father was an experimental test pilot during the war, and he was the one that flew the airplanes and tested them prior to the airplanes going into war to be sure that they would function the way they were supposed to function. He was an experimental test pilot in the 1940s, maybe the late 1930s. He tested the airplanes, the Corsair, for Chance fought, in Connecticut and in Florida. When we lived in Connecticut, he was the experimental test pilot, and he took a plane up one day, and they were supposed to fly it under the same conditions as if the plane were going to war. They had to push the engine to its ultimate level. It had to be at a certain altitude to try everything out. While my dad was flying, all of a sudden he noticed smoke coming out of the airplane. And so he turned the airplane around, because what they want to do is to be sure that the airplane, if it has problems, gets back to the airport so that they can check into it and see what the problem is and correct it. But the smoke filled the cabin, he couldn't see what he was doing, and all of a sudden he saw flames coming out of the engine. And so he decided that he would have to abort and use his parachute to get out safely. Unfortunately, the canopy didn't open all the way, and so he had to force his way out. He used his parachute. He parachuted to the ground. In parachuting, he sprained his ankles, and he also had burns on his face. He was way out in the country, and so he had to hobble to the nearest farmhouse to see if someone would call so he could have a ride to the hospital. But I gather from what I read that the woman took one look at him and kind of said, And so he finally made it to the highway, and a car took him to the hospital where they bandaged him up and brought him home. The airplane, he had diverted it so that it wouldn't hit any populated areas, and it went into the river and burst into flame, and the parts went into the river, and they never did recover it. But what I remember is I was a young child, and my father came home, and my cat ran under his chair, and I went to get my cat, and I looked up, and all I could see on his face was a slit for his mouth, 2 slits for his nose, and slits for his eyes. Scared me half to death. But he then became a member of the Caterpillar Club, because the parachutes that they used were made of caterpillar silk. In fact, he still had a piece of it. He said he wouldn't get rid of it because it saved his life. Well, he wasn't really in the military, but what did I learn? I think that it takes a lot of people to win a war. It takes the people in the military and those that give their lives to be sure that the equipment that they use in the war functions appropriately. And several of the test pilots did lose their lives in testing out the airplane. My dad was one of the lucky ones. We have a wonderful country, and I agree with something that Patsy Johnson said: ask not what you can do, and ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I think my dad exemplified that by being a experimental test pilot during the war.